We left the United States and didn't see land again until we got to Melbourne, Australia. And from Melbourne, Australia, we went around the Australian Bight almost to Africa. We were the MPs on the ship. It was a Navy troop ship, and we went unescorted. We zigzagged and everything else. And when we were 2 days outside of Bombay, there was a Japanese submarine, which the Navy ship that we were on, fortunately, and we knew it because we were part of the MPs on the ship, got us into Bombay without any incidents. They outrun the sub. And then from Bombay, we were there for 2 or 3 days, which was an unreal surprise to me how people could live. And from there, we went across the country 5 days on a single truck railroad that had a bench seat in the middle, and it was our first exposure to malaria. And we had to have netting around us and everything else, and a hole in each end of the car was the latrine. From there, we went to Calcutta. We stayed there for several weeks. That's a matter of fact, that's when your dad was born. I was in Calcutta, India, when he was born. From there, our squadron was a fighter control squadron. We took care of all our own fighters. They had a transmitter in their airplane fighters that would send out a pipsqueak whenever, all the time when they were on a mission, and we would have to track them. And if they got lost or hurt or needed help, we would help them from the bearings we would give them, get them back, and they would come across our station wiggling their wings. So, and then, we just did a lot of that all during the war with the P-51s toward the end and the P-40s in the beginning, which were the Flying Tigers. Well, that's what we were. We did that for some reason. We knew that the war was drawing down. Oh, Germany had quit, and they started putting us on the airplanes. And I was put on a C-47 as a radio operator. The pilots used to let us fly the airplanes across China on the horizon, so that you keep the plane level. Otherwise, you'll be zigzagging and you go off course. And it was thrilling. And then we got chased out of Chikiang, which was not too far from Kunming, by the Japanese after we put a concrete runway in. So anyway, we were going back and forth across the country, and I have a couple of notes here. In October of 1945, we flew from Kunming to Iping to Hastings, I guess, and then back to Kunming, 6.5 hours. We went from 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 14 missions back and forth with our pilots on a C-47. We went to Chongqing, and we went all over the place. There's one experience that really impressed me, was one of the last ones after the war had ended. We had to fly from Kunming to Yusanani, and then we had to go from Yusanani to Mendoza. And this was all in northern China. Our mission was to pick up, I think it was 2 or 3 Navy men who had electronic equipment all set up there to, keep watching over all our planes and everything else. And when we landed in a rice paddy. And the rice paddy had no runway, had nothing but mud. And when we landed, we knew when we got to the end of the not runway, the flattened mud, our airplane started to sink into it. And then the pilot, he turned it around, and he put it as far back to where the wheels were sinking into the mud. And then we had the plane already loaded with electronic equipment and a couple of Navy corpsmen, and then we had to take off. And it was exciting because the pilot wouldn't let the plane move until the tail went up, and it literally took it off the ground.
Yeah.
And we got out of the mud, went halfway down, full flaps. He said, "No, we're going to try it." And he said, if it doesn't, don't stall out. We've made it. And of course, we made it.
Yeah.
But it was thrilling. It was different. And that there was a whole lot of these places. But we went to October. We went from Kunming, 1945. We went from Kunming to Hankow, and that was a 5.5-hour trip. And then we took off and went to Shanghai. With that, and that was Japanese. But they were discussing apparently peace talks. And the next flight, we went back to Shanghai. We stayed there overnight because some of the higher ups went out to talk to the Japanese. And what we know now later is that that's what they were talking about. And then we went to Hankow again, and then to Chikiang, which was also Japanese, but at that time we took some troops there. And then that was October 21st, 1945. And October 30th, we went from Kunming to Shanghai, 6.5-hour flight, more officers and some Chinese troops. And when we landed, they would not let us, the crew, we could not get off the plane. We could get off the plane, but we couldn't leave the plane there. We had to stay while the others went in and had discussions. And then we made another trip on November 5th from Kunming to Shanghai, and we stayed there for 2 nights, and we were already starting to make plans to bring the Chinese troops from the interior back to the coast. Well, that was the page after the war was over. On November 7, 1945, we went from Shanghai to Hankow, 2.5 hours, and then back to Kunming, 5 hours. And then the last flight we made, and the war was over, but we were taking troops out after the war ended.
Yeah.
But on November 10th was the one that I just told you about in the mud paddy.
Yeah.
And then after that, I didn't keep records anymore because we could not come back to the United States until we transferred all the Chinese troops from the interior to the coast. And we did that with C-46s, and ours was a 47. We actually overloaded the troops on the planes, but the C-47 was a great plane, and it was a very long runway at Kunming, but it was 5 miles up. We'd rev it all the way up, and we'd take off, and we always got off on the 47s, but we lost a lot of the 46s that were loaded, because they used to call that the flying prostitute, because it had a very big fuselage, smaller wings, similar to the 47, but heavier motors because it had more power.
But not as much lift.
Not as much lift.
Yeah.
And that's why they sometimes didn't get off the end of the runway.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's all been an experience, and living over there was very poor.
Yeah.
It's unreal to think that people ever lived like that. But Shanghai was a beautiful city, and what is now Beijing, I can't remember the name of it.
Well, it was Peking, I think.
Peking, yeah. At that time was Peking,